Alan cannot get in, so...
No, he can't get in, which is very sad. We have a member of the community called Alan Wall who lives in a wheelchair. Unfortunately, he can't get in because of the up and down in the stairs and heaven knows what else. But Tom is making a recording, so we can give Alan the copy of it. So let me welcome you. This is the first rebirth of the Baltic Key Residence Committee and the first activity, so in its new form. And as you will see from the notice boards, there are a number of activities which we have planned. One of them is a series of what I call talks rather than lectures. And talks suggests that we exchange ideas and give ourselves time to ask questions. So this is not a long lecture. We have other things planned for later in the month. We begin our series of musical evenings where it's like Baltic Key Island discs. We'll see how that works. The acoustics here might be a bit challenging, but that's also on the notice board. Plus other things, Mothers and Babies Club, Wine Appreciation Society, the book depository, which is now working very nicely, I'm glad to see. And we hope for a Christmas party. I have a secret plan to get George to be Father Christmas.
Scariest Father Christmas there ever has been.
He would be a very distinguished Father Christmas, I think, but he doesn't know about that yet. I thought for the talks, I've talked to a number of friends, and there are so many interesting topics which people who spend their lives busy in offices, many of them changing the world as they do so, might find interesting. And the first topic is a very broad picture of why some countries are rich and other countries are not. It's, in other words, a very brief introduction to economic history. And it's reasonably up to date, even though it rests upon a literature which goes back to Adam Smith in the 1770s. But there has been an efflorescence of literature in the last 30 or 40 years, usually in a series of very big, fat books. Anybody among you who want to know more about the literature, just let me know and I'll give you a list. What I'm going to do is to boil it down to a simpler form as it's possible to do in half an hour or so, and perhaps stimulate you to think about where we are. Let me begin with a picture of the world which you might not be familiar with. It's not a geographical picture. It's, Michelle, make yourself at home. There's a seat here with your name on it. And wine.
Drink first.
In reverse order.
You're going to need it.
Yeah. I'm going to show you a map of the world in a form which you may not have seen before. It's a cultural map of the world. And when I show you a map, I'm going to draw very simple pictures on here rather than have PowerPoints beaming at you every 20 seconds. The world, for reasons I'll explain in a separate lecture, talk, is lived in very broadly two forms of society, two large camps, in very crude terms. Of course, there's much bit of variety and complexity between the two camps. And way they look is, if you draw a graph of 2 dimensions and you place the countries of the world on these 2 dimensions. This dimension here is what you might call the basic form of order which a society accepts and builds itself around. And it's a continuum. At one end, you have a form of order which is called secular rational. What that means is that the basic principles around which the society is built are rational. In other words, they're based upon the idea that there is a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is topped by people who deserve to be there because the majority of people have decided that what they want to do is what the majority of people want done. That's rational. People have a choice, people announce what their plans are, they're considered, and there's a voting system. And it is secular in the sense that there's no other body in society which takes power and dominates, like a religion. So in some countries the religion dominates the structure, in other societies it does not. An example of a society that is dominated by religion is most Islamic societies. You could argue also that China is dominated by a kind of Confucian religion. You could argue as much of Southern Europe, until quite recently it was dominated by Catholicism, and so to Latin America. So those societies, which are not secular rational, are known as traditional. And they're traditional because that was the first formula which historically human beings worked out to make sense of how to bring order to the society. So 10,000, 5,000, 2,000, 1,000 years ago, the people who were given the right to run the society were usually the people who control the religion. And if it were not the priests themselves, it was the king or the prince or the general who acted as if he controlled the religion. So that's a traditional society, and this is a secular rational society. Now there's another dimension here, which is a quite different dimension, but a very important way of understanding how society is organized. At this end of the scale, there's what's called self-expression, or in other terms, individual based. And at this end, it's group. So, if you say, typically, talk with, let's say, an American person or a British person and say, tell me about your identity. So, if this is order, this is identity. If you talk to an American about identity or a British person about identity and keep him talking about the way he sees himself or herself, there's a great deal of talk about me, about my success, about my position, about I comes into the conversation constantly. And if you don't believe me, get out a content analysis chart and watch American television and see the referencing to "I did it my way," kind of the national anthem. Now, there's nothing wrong with that It's just distinct. In other societies, it's a group which matters, and your identity is not as an individual, but as a member of a group. So you talk to a Chinese person, and he or she is part of the family. He or she does not exist psychologically, separately. He cannot disembed himself from family. The obligations are so powerful, and the dependencies are so powerful, and that's the way it is. So you have that dimension of identity, and you have that dimension of order. So where do the countries of the world fit? There are roughly 3 bands. You have a band here, you have a band here, and a band here. The band in the top right-hand corner is Northern Europe, Scandinavia, US, Japan, and Australia and New Zealand. In other words, with Japan as an outlier, largely Anglo-Saxon, but not entirely. Then you have a band here, which includes Southern Europe, and there is a boundary with France kind of halfway here, and the Mediterranean countries, plus some Latin American countries. And China. And then you have another group here, which is the Arab world, the Islamic world, the world of Russia, Eastern Europe, most of the rest of Asia, Southeast Asia, with the exception of Hong Kong and Singapore, which are up here. Now, that's how the world is, culturally. When you say who has all the money is all here. The wealth is here. So, in terms of wealth and poverty, this is high income, this is middle income, and this is low income. Low income in terms of per capita income. The best index of how good a country is at running itself in terms of economic wealth is per capita income. And the best index of how well it's doing in practice is productivity per person. Now, what you find is there is a gradation, and countries here are low income, middle income, high income. Now, the biggest question in economic history is this a progression? Do people make the progression? And the simple answer is some do, but we don't know whether they can in all cases. Because if you say take China, which is here, which is a secular society, the religion of Confucianism doesn't have a deity. It doesn't have a church. And it's not the same as, say, Catholicism or Buddhism or Islam, in the sense that the state can take over and express its legitimacy that way. But if you wanted to move China from here to here, you would have to make China individualist. Whereas it's deeply collectivist and very difficult to make that transition. And there are other aspects of that which I'll come to. Now, what has tended to happen is that some countries have, by being very careful about how they stitch themselves together in times of change, particularly in the last 30, 40 years, made the transition from here to here, or from here to here. Many of them are trying constantly to make that transition. Most of them run into a problem. And the problem is called the middle income trap. Now, the middle income trap works like this. If you take economic history and you look at the world over the last 1,000 years, let's say from 1000 to 2015, for most of that time, countries were running at about $250 US per capita. So we've got 1,500 here, and we've got 2,000 here. And what happened is most countries were running like that. Everybody was more or less equally, basically poor. They were okay, but they were not enormously rich. Some people were in those societies, but most people were not. And then there was a gigantic shift around about 1830, when one country took off, and it took off in relative terms like that, and that was the UK. The first industrial revolution. And the mechanism here was that human beings learned to use mechanical steam power to increase their capacity to do things, which then changed industry. They introduced factories, they introduced productivity, they introduced all sorts of new mechanisms to make this work, and they became very, very rich. America did the same, just a bit later. Germany, a bit later. France, a bit later. The Netherlands also. And Australia and New Zealand followed. Japan did not begin until 1860 with Meiji Restoration, and it moved and then slowed down and then failed and then went back up again after the Second World War.
Why? Why were they behind us?
Sorry?
Japan, why was it so far behind us? It had the same technological as us.
Two world wars, or two wars.
So they stepped back each time after each war, they were set back.
What happened is, in 1868, Japan had been closed for 250 years and was basically a medieval society run by a shogun, prime minister, and with the samurai as the civil service. It was it was at this level. They realized that given the power of the West, particularly technically, they were going to be in deep trouble. So there was a revolution in Japan called Meiji Restoration, where a group of Satsuma and Choshu samurai revolted, overturned the government, put in a new government which was entirely rational, and said we must reform the country. They reformed the country in a very interesting way. For 30 years, from 1868 onwards, they searched the world for the best way to organize a country. So they sent delegations to see How does the education system work? How does the labour relations system work? How does the legal system work? How does the engineering system work? How does the marketing work, etc., etc. And they came back to Japan over these 20 or 30 years and said, this is how it's done in the best countries. So they went to America for labour relations, they went to Germany for law, they went to France for law, they went to England for engineering, they went everywhere they thought was the best. And they took it back to Japan and converted it to something Japanese, which then took them up to the 1930s as a major industrial power. And then the Second World War collapsed. And then the same again, we go out and learn, particularly industry, particularly American production industry, and then you turn it into something Japanese, and you do that. In the years between 1960 and today. The Koreans have done the same. Now, Hong Kong and Singapore were given a leg up, in a sense, by being very small and having an injection of high-quality administration, government administration from the UK. So they had a head start and they industrialized and followed the same trajectory. Now, that is the history, but if we look today in slightly more detail at what is happening and change the focus, as it were, we have $10,000 per capita, 15,000, 20,000, and I say it goes up to 40. Over time, if we take it, let's say, over the last 30 years, we know that the US, the UK, Germany, Japan, etc., is up here at about 40,000. That is the aim. They've already got there following the earlier trajectory over the last 150 years. What you see, though, is a group of countries like, say, Mexico, Argentina, Indonesia, Malaysia, much of Latin America, some parts of Africa, like South Africa, the whole of Southern Europe, the whole of Eastern Europe, and the whole of the Middle East. Well, the Middle East is a special case because of the oil, India, etc. Following this trajectory, take 1950 to now. What happens is they are usually starting in 1950 at about 3,000. They run slowly, and get up to about 8,000 or 9,000, and they start edging up, and then they level off, one after the other. Level off, level off, level off. Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, whatever, they can't get beyond the barrier. The barrier is at about 13,000. It's not an exact barrier, obviously, but ballpark figure, somewhere between 13 and 15,000 US per capita is a barrier which they cannot get through, except for a number of cases which have success. One was South Korea. Another was Taiwan. Another was, well, Hong Kong and Singapore. And they are the exceptions. And they are on their way to joining the very heavyweight successes. So the question arises as to why the middle income trap is got around by these countries, but not by these. So we now have to look at the reasons. If you're looking at any economy, any society, and trying to make sense of how it works, you have three dimensions to have in mind. One is political. So there is a political structure. There is an economic structure. And there is a socio-cultural structure, all which have to be made sense of, have to be balanced. These are the great forces in a society which a government has to manage and keep in balance. Now, in the pre-modern condition, I'll explain what I mean by that. The way they're balanced is that the political dimension is handled through a form of government which is essentially autocratic. So you have an autocracy the government is run by a bunch of people who can't be dislodged, who are not voted in, who dominate, and who, in a sense, always have. Then you have, in the economy, a very sinister extraction of the surplus. So whatever money is going in society is extracted by the elite. And in the cultural domain, here you have the sedation of the masses. So, the people here don't have a say, but they're told you're being looked after. You're being looked after because of the ideology, say communism, or the religion, say Islam, and we are the people who run the religion or the ideology. Trust us. And the ideology includes looking after you. So you'll be all right because we're looking after you. Communism in China, communism in Russia, Islam throughout the Islamic world, and in the earlier period of European history, Catholicism gave people that same legitimacy. You're being looked after. You represent God and go to church and you'll be all right. While we take what's going.
In your monthly collection or weekly collection?
In the collections, but more than that, Michelle, more than that, if we wanted to be cynical about, I'll give you several cases. Let's start with Catholicism in the medieval period. Catholicism ran very early as a very proper form of orderly part of society which helped running business. They kept the accounts. If you started a company in 8th century Bologna, say you wanted to start a vineyard, and there were 28 of you come together, you make a committee, you say we'll run a vineyard. The accounts are kept by the church. The monthly meetings are held in the church. The annual meeting is controlled by the church, and all of the recordings are run through the church, and you pay fees for the candles and for the food and the wine and for the accounting. Quite small fees, very reasonable. The reason being that the people in the church are the only people who can read and write. And they're the people who know how to do accounts. In fact, they invented accounting. The first accounting book was by a Jesuit priest in 14